Hello, everybody, and welcome to In the Doll World. I am your host, Georgette Taylor, and I'm so excited to be coming to you today with another amazing guest. Our guest today is Dominique Jean-Louis, and she is the Associate Curator of History Exhibitions at the New York Historical Society, as well as the co-curator of Black Dolls, an upcoming exhibition that's going to be held at the New York Historical Society as well. Thank you so much, Dominique, for being here on In the Doll World. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Oh, I've been thrilled to talk to you as well, Georgette. I've been looking forward to this interview, and thank you so much for having me and for showing such an interest in the show. We're really excited now that it's finally about to open. It's been a few
Yes.
years, so
So you must
it
be
feels good.
busy.
Very busy. Installation is a many pronged thing, but we're making it through, and we're going to be having people in the galleries to see these dolls, which is the most important thing. So
Yeah,
I'm thrilled about that.
that is totally the most important thing, and I'm so glad that the New York Historical Society is doing this. So
Yes.
just tell me a little bit about the history of the New York Historical Society, as well as what you do there. I know you're the associate curator, but just tell us a little bit about, your job there and what that entails as well.
Absolutely. So, New York Historical Society holds the distinction of being the oldest museum in New York. We were founded all the way back in 1804 by some of the same people who helped found this nation, men like Alexander Hamilton, that kind of thing, who were present at the start of our country, who wanted to start thinking about legacy and history and how do we preserve our own story as the country gets underway. So, the institution has a very long and very prominent and honorable history. And it both is obviously in the name a place where the history of New York is considered, not just New York City, but the entire state. But over the years, it's evolved into an institution that thinks critically about America more generally, as I mentioned, since it has as its founding, the involvement of some of these same people who helped to found the country, these larger themes and trends in American history, democracy, the history of slavery, race, identity, American art, American both folk art and fine art, and also artifacts, documents. We're both a museum and a library. So it has a pretty wide-ranging mandate, but certainly at our core, we're a place where we think about how history matters for our current moment and how it has mattered in the past.
Yeah, that's really so important, and it's so great that it was started, to, like you said, not so much solidify the history, but to give people information of what the history of New York State is, or New York is, and all the things that are being brought to New York State, and the things that grew out of the people who showed up there. So I think that's great. I think it's wonderful. So what is your connection with the New York Historical Society? How did you get started there? I'm just interested in finding out that history.
Absolutely. So I'm looking at the date now, and it's coming up on 5 years that I've
Wow.
been involved in the New York Historical Society, which is taking me aback a little bit. It still, in some ways, feels like I'm brand new. So I began work with the New York Historical Society in 2017. At that time, they were putting together an exhibition that came to be called Black Citizenship in the Age of Jim Crow. And it was an exhibition that was so well timed and so important. It was all about basically the history of Reconstruction. It started out with the reason the Civil War was fought, which of course is whether or not slavery would continue in the nation, and then everything that happens afterwards, both the grand promise and the really staggering triumphs of Reconstruction, where more than 1,000 Black men held elected office. You had, voter participation rates in the South well into the 90th percentile, these stunning moments of welcoming the formerly enslaved into American democracy. And then, of course, what follows is a crushing backlash.
Yes,
specifically,
very
as
so.
you well know, exactly, the rise and the unfortunate long life of the Jim Crow system. So they wanted to do an exhibition about that incredibly timely and important topic, in part because one of our scholar trustees, Henry Louis Gates Jr., who should be known for to many people, he has, of course, this PBS documentary series on genealogy. He was doing a documentary for PBS at the time on the same subject, and thought, how great would it be to have an exhibition to complement it, especially because when the exhibition was set to open in 2018, it was the 150th anniversary of the ratification of the 14th Amendment, the sesquicentennial. It's a word you don't get to say often. And so it was a little bit of a rush to get it out in time for that anniversary, given that, the idea had first come in 2017. So in any case, all of that is to say they needed help putting the exhibition together. On our history exhibitions team, we have a number of different curators at the New York Historical Society, some who deal primarily with, art, paintings, photographs, some who deal primarily with, objects and folk art. Our history exhibitions team was working on several things at the time, so they brought me on as a kind of project historian to help them wade through that research, write the exhibition, select objects, that kind of thing. So I worked on that exhibition part-time, as I was still, before then I had been a full-time graduate student working on completing my doctorate. And then after the exhibition opened in 2018, I was very, very lucky enough to be invited to come on full-time as a member of our history exhibitions team at New York Historical Society. So since then, we've done exhibitions on the United States presidency. We're about to open an exhibition on Frederick Douglass.
Yeah.
And then in the course of that work, I was asked to help with an exhibition on this collection of Black dolls that the New York Historical Society was interested in exhibiting.
It seems like you have touched a lot of different areas in that, in the job that you have already,
Oh, it's my favorite thing.
Yeah.
It's my favorite thing about working in museums is that you never know what you're going to become suddenly an expert in.
Yes.
That the level of research and the standard we hold ourselves to is very high. So for all of our subjects, even if it's, a 100-word exhibition label, you can be sure that hours of research, many, many drafts of writing have gone into it, because we want, we're a place that celebrates history. We want to make sure we get it right. And there's no shortcuts. You just have to do the research, sit with the ideas, talk it through. Exactly.
Yeah. And that's wonderful to know, the thoroughness of what you do, because that is so important. Like you said, it is about history. So you need to be able to know what you're talking about and do the work that it requires to get the information, to share that with people. I'm a native New Yorker, so
Wonderful.
It's always really very fun for me to talk about things that are in New York, because it's such a vibrant place, and it's such a place that has so many different cultures. And
Absolutely.
so, and I see, just looking at a lot of the things that you do, or a lot of exhibitions, it touches all different cultures. And so I just love that about what you guys are doing there. So and you were talking about the Black dolls, and somebody invited you to be on that,
Yes.
to be a curator in that. What is your history with dolls? What kind of journey do you have with dolls?
Oh man, I guess it goes way back. Like many girls of my age, we were given dolls to play with, and I'll share. I'm turning 35 this year, so I'm a kind of dyed-in-the-wool millennial. And so I was a child in the late 80s, early 90s, when I was lucky enough that there was, a visible amount of diversity in dolls, that if you had a little Black girl, you could get her a little Black doll by walking into Toys R Us and picking one out. And it's probably next to the white doll, and, they were otherwise identical. And that's very much the universe I grew up in, although it was very interesting. I'm from a big Haitian family, and like many Haitian people, everyone in the family is a different skin tone. And so my older sister and I grew up very closely, but she's a lot more darker skinned than I am. And so there was always a little bit of a conversation that would happen about which doll I would get and whether or not we would get the same doll, which of course is, is part of this conversation about Black dolls, is that race is so much more than skin color. However, how do you identify a Black doll if not by its color? Hopefully we can talk more about this a little later, but one of the most exciting parts about this exhibition that I can't wait to share is that we'll be displaying 3 dolls that were handmade by a woman named Harriet Jacobs, who's one of the most important writers of the American canon. She's a woman who was born into slavery, escaped, documented her history of sexual abuse, which was considered very taboo at the time. And when she escaped to the North, she worked as a domestic, and the dolls that we are displaying were made for the family that she worked for. And we're also displaying a portrait of her. And Harriet Jacobs, it was a very light-skinned woman. And over the course of, doing research about her and deciding what the display was going to be, it occurs to me that if Harriet Jacobs made a doll of herself, would it be saved as a Black doll? Would it be seen as a Black doll?
Right.
And so in any case, I connected very much as someone who is lighter skinned myself to think about the importance of representation, but also how diverse the Black community is now, has always has been, and how much dolls do and don't do a good job of representing all that it means to be Black, especially when we're such a diverse community and representation is equally important to everybody. It's just such a question that helps us think about, like, what is this thing of Blackness? If it's deeper than skin deep, how do we go about describing it?
How do you go about describing it and showcasing it so that everybody can understand? Like you said, it's not necessarily just about the skin color. It could be about, just the culture in general of being Black, So I know you talked about the Black Dolls exhibition coming to the New York Historical Society. First, I wanted to find out, is this the first show that they've ever had that dealt with Black dolls? And also just talk about how that Black doll exhibition came about.
Absolutely. So this is the first exhibition at the New York Historical Society, I'm fairly certain, that has dealt directly with the idea of Black dolls. The New York Historical Society has historically really delved into issues of race in America. I mentioned the Black Citizenship in the Age of Jim Crow show. Very notably in the early 2000s, I believe in 2004, we had done a really landmark exhibition called Slavery in New York that looks at the history of New York, famously a part of the Union, its own experience with slavery, where people came away really wowed by, at one point 40% of New Yorkers owned slaves. Oh, wow. It wasn't until 1827 that slavery ended. And in fact, for 5 more years now, there's been slavery in New York longer than there hasn't. In any case, that kind of history has always been explored at the institution. But then this show is a little bit different. So the Black dolls in this show, the dolls themselves, largely come from a private collection of a woman named Deborah Neff. She's a lawyer and a woman who has been very interested in the history of Black dolls, and a collector of both Black dolls themselves, and, as we'll discuss, also photographs of children with Black dolls and also Black children with white dolls. So her collection has been exhibited before, once at the Minguet Museum, which traveled, and then another exhibition at the Maison Rouge in Paris. But both of those exhibitions of her work focused more on the dolls as pieces of folk art. There wasn't a lot of interpretation. You were welcome to kind of interrogate how they looked, but my co-curator and our museum director, Margie Hofer, when she had heard of these exhibitions and seen some of the dolls, she was struck by how much more you get out of them if you could really understand the context surrounding these dolls. And so she became interested in how the New York Historical Society could perhaps be a very different kind of venue to explore this history, both what's going on in the country at the time these dolls were made. So the collection largely comes from the early to mid 19th century, just before the Civil War, to the early 20th century, the 1920s or so. And so obviously that is a time of tremendous upheaval and strife in terms of the United States experience with race, racial equality, discrimination, all of those things. But also on a deeper level, the history of needlework and fiber arts, and the history of women in labor. Who are these women who are making these dolls? we obviously don't have many of their names or their stories
Mm-hmm.
or more biographical information, but we can know something about the circumstances that led them to domestic work, that led them to the particular materials that these dolls were made of. And so she wanted to offer a little bit more historical background in displaying these dolls. And that's how I came to the show. When I was working, in the building, it was like, oh, here's a perfect chance to bring in a little bit more of a historian's background alongside Margie Hofer has this amazing career of, folk art and looking more at artifacts more deeply from that same time period as well. And so I think we made a really strong team in pulling out both sides of the dolls themselves
Right.
as, art pieces to be considered, but also an archive of history at the time.
Yeah, exactly. So said they're going to be photographs too. So what
Yes.
do the photographs consist of exactly?
So the photographs, Deborah Neff has a really extraordinary collection of photographs, photograph originals. As I mentioned, there aren't many existing photographs, especially before the 20th century, of Black children with Black dolls vanishing with you. But her collection largely consists of white children with Black dolls, and then Black children with white dolls. There are a couple of examples of Black children with Black dolls. That really offer the opportunity to not just look at the dolls, but look at, the kids who played with them and the kids who gave those pieces of cloth meaning and gave them, affection and, torture or whatever else, all the ways that kids interact with their dolls. You can kind of look in the faces of these kids themselves. And so in the exhibition, what we've chosen to do is there's quite a range of, blown up reproductions, because these are, albumin prints, tintypes. I mean, we have a case of the originals and they're all like 3 inches tall. They're really, really teensy. And then we'll have, more enlargements on the wall where people can see them, at eye level, in full resolution, so you could really kind of consider them. And we're doing
immersed in that,
exactly, and a lot of collages too, so you can really compare and contrast the setup, the children themselves, the dolls themselves. Is this an urban environment? Is this a rural environment? Where do you think that doll came from? And so getting to compare them in that way, as well as see them in the original, I think is going to be really exciting.
Yeah, that's going to be really exciting. Just because, I mean, to see a picture, like you said, of a young girl, whether they're Black or white, in that time, and then see the doll that they're playing with actually there, is just really going to be, that's going to be very, like you said, immersive, I think. It creates a whole different conversation, I think, about the doll and about, and about play in general.
And I'll share a spoiler as well. There is just one instance in Deborah Neff's collection that we're going to be able to share where the doll from a historic photograph is present in the collection. So be able to see the doll in person and then see, I believe, a late 19th century image of that same doll with the child who played with it. We actually have 2 images of that doll.
That is so
and
cool.
Especially as a historian, where so many of the people you deal with, you never get to see a picture of them, or or you have an artifact but don't know anything about their life, or you have the picture but nothing about their life. It's so amazing to be able to say, wow, this doll came from somewhere. It was held by the hand by that little girl. It's really remarkable. And so,
I must say, that sounds.
Feel very lucky to be able to bring that to people.
You also, I did find out you also have a tour, you and and is it Margie Hofer?
Margie.
Margie, okay, you guys are doing a Black Doll Gallery tour as well? Okay.
Yep. Throughout the exhibition's run, so it's going to be opening in February. It opens at the end of February on the 24th, and then we will be throughout the run. We'll be having curator tours where we have this fantastic lineup of programming that we're doing in conjunction with our Center for Women's History. So we'll have programs on the Addie American doll and needlecraft and women's fiber arts, and we'll have ones on photography. So there's going to be many opportunities to engage with some of the content of the show outside of just the exhibition itself. And it's, perhaps an upside of of these COVID times we're living in, that those will be virtual, so that even if you're not able to come to the exhibition itself, hopefully you'll still be able to get a taste of some of the themes and the stories and the meaning that we're making of these dolls through that through that programming.
That is great. Yeah, that's a great thing, because like you said, the people who can't actually physically get there, it gives them the information that they need to see what the show is really going to be about. And the fact that both of you are talking about that, I think is just going to give them a wider perspective of what you guys are presenting. So what I wanted to find out from you, though, I mean, living in New York, I wanted to know what does the Black Dolls exhibition mean for the Historical Society and also for the community? Because I think that's so important.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to have a show like this in New York. And it's funny because a lot of the dolls, or I think most of them in the collection, have their origins in the South, that this reflects a history of slavery and its aftermath. It reflects a history of Black women's contributions to domestic work in the South, and all that happens after slavery ends. And yet this exhibition is in New York City. But in many ways, I think that's very apt. On the one hand, New York is a majority non-white city, and not just in terms of its historically deep and rich and diverse Black community, which I'm thrilled we'll get to see this show.
Yes.
We know that all cultures have doll traditions, right? White and Black and otherwise. And so I'm just so thrilled that, New York is about 30% foreign born, that immigrants and Native New Yorkers and people of all stripes will be coming into the show and bringing their own sense of what the dolls they played with as kids looked like or didn't look like, what dolls they perhaps are giving to their own children or thinking about giving to their children. These are just issues that are very, very much alive to anybody. And that's something, it is a question we came across again and again throughout the curatorial process, is all the different perspectives that people will be bringing into this show. I myself, I certainly worked domestic jobs to make ends meet in the past. From a Black family, so many of the women in my family have. I have a particular relationship to artifacts that kind of reflect in some ways that relationship that Black women have had to domestic service, and how it's not always, that can be a very painful history. It's not always a positive thing, but also knowing that some people will come in and see these dolls and see some of the images of Black women domestic laborers that we have in the show, and have a great deal of affection. I remember my babysitter. I remember, the woman who lived with my family and took care of me. And it's not our position to say either of those perspectives are wrong, or you shouldn't have them, or, you should be thinking a different way. But it is our role, and one we took very seriously, to say, you are absolutely, your perspective is yours to honor. Here's some of the history. Here's some of the facts that you should know as you're thinking about what these dolls mean, not just to you, but also more generally. And so I think no matter what, people, specifically in New York, a city of 9 million people from all different stripes, everyone's going to have their own perspective, and therefore I think everyone will have that perspective changed in some way, or just exposed to a different perspective on these dolls because of the variety of entry points we're offering in the show. I hope that people come away with a new consideration of dolls that they haven't before. I know working on the show, I have a brand new consideration of dolls. And the last point I'll make as well is that on why it's important to have in New York. I shared this story with the folks at Smithsonian Magazine a couple of months ago for a story they were doing. New York City is the headquarters of the American Girl dolls. And if you're ever walking down on Fifth Avenue, it's, one of the ritziest parts of the city. It's not uncommon at all to see, excited girls, perhaps dressed like their dolls or with the big bags from the American Girl Company. It's such a destination for, young doll enthusiasts. And I remember growing up in the 90s, I was the prime market for the American Girl dolls. And I wanted one so bad. Georgette, I can remember with such vividness the way that catalog was big, and they did centerfold. So you would open it up and you'd have a life-size doll. And I wanted one so bad. I loved history. I loved reading. And of course, the dolls had books that went along with each of the characters. But I wasn't from a family who could afford $100 doll for one of their 5 kids, right?
Right.
And so I remember one Christmas, I remember so vividly, my mom taking me aside and saying, Nikki, she calls me Nikki, there is not going to be an American doll for you under the tree this year. I need you to understand that now so that you can still have a good Christmas. It's okay to feel sad about that. It's okay to feel mad that you can't get this thing. You still should get a good Christmas. And I don't want you to ruin your Christmas if you don't get the thing you want most under the tree.
Right.
And I've thought about that moment so much over the course of the show, because it both shows how important dolls are to especially little girls, especially this little girl, how it can be the one thing you feel like would just make your life what you want it to be. But then also, you know, there is this history of mothers and daughters and women more generally who are saying, you know, I'm going to challenge you to see what you can do without, right? That we are going to have enough no matter how much we have. We're going to be honest about the realities, but we are also going to say there's still love here. You're still going to have a good Christmas. It's just not going to have this doll in it.
It's just not going to be with American Girl.
It's Addie's not going to be there. Josefina's not going to be there. Someone else will. But
and they were really important dolls too, because it's not only, you know, the fact that, especially when they came out with the African American doll, you know, to showcase the history of that, you know, the history of her within a collection of other dolls, that her history mattered, you know, her culture mattered. And I think it was, I mean, like, dolls are just so important to have them represented of who you are as a person, you know. And I think that's the connection that young girls see and young girls feel when they look at dolls, is that doll represent me? And if it doesn't, you know, where is she? It's just something that I think all people who either create dolls or collect dolls have that, you know, have that thing about them, that it has to be, it's something that represents them, and that what makes them feel like they're being seen, you know. That is so important.
I couldn't agree more. And it's one of the reasons why, one of the other ways this show is different than the other exhibitions of this collection, is that we call it kind of a coda to the rest of the show. But the entire last section of the exhibition is about the history of manufactured dolls, you know, commercially produced dolls in the 20th century. Even though the bulk of the show is about these handmade dolls, these one-of-a-kind handmade objects, exactly why, you know, you're saying this is exactly why we wanted to put that last section in there, because the meaning of dolls goes beyond just, wow, this one person made this. This is a manifestation of their own creative energy and spirit that is something to behold, but also, even if they're not handmade, even if they're mass produced and your baby Nancy doll looks exactly like these, you know, 300 other baby Nancy dolls, that doesn't mean that it's not still coveted, like you're saying, that it's not still an object of that holds such representational power that it just can mean everything to a kid. And not just a kid, because one of the last parts of that exhibition, we put out a call to the doll collector community, because we wanted to feature at the end of the exhibition a slideshow of collectors. And I'm fairly certain they're all adult women, because as you're saying, the connection doesn't end just because we grow up. And you see, I'm so thrilled about the response we've gotten, and we're actually finalizing the slideshow now. And so I'm just so happy with how it came out. These women who are just so overjoyed by their collection. And there's both handmade dolls, you know, dolls they made themselves, there's commercial dolls, and you just see both what dolls continue to mean. And also what I think the effect of the slideshow shares is how important it is to build community around something like dolls. These are women who, you know, go to doll shows, and these are women who are on the online forums, you know, has anyone seen this doll? And that's such a beautiful way for women to connect. And I apologize, I could get emotional just thinking about it. The dolls the handmade dolls from the earlier sections of the exhibition, those are not women who got to be in community. One of the, I know from experience, one of the hardest parts about working in domestic service is how isolated you are from other people in your community, from your own family, the cruelty of being
Yes.
forced to care for
To
someone
care for
else's
the
kid
mother
all
too.
day, and
Yes.
you've got a kid that of your own that you can't tend
Yes.
to.
And not
And
being respected either for what it is that you do,
absolutely,
and
all
for
the,
whatever all the time, bring to the table,
every way that job is difficult, and as you said, it carries disrespect and difficulty. You don't get to share that with anybody, and
Mhm.
direct, even though in every house on that block, you have another domestic, other woman who's working in a domestic role. Those women didn't get to be in community in quite the same way. There were chances, certainly washerwomen would often wash together, but oftentimes for women who are making these dolls, they were not they weren't necessarily
Mhm.
able to
Right.
go home, log on to a
Mhm.
forum and say, here's this doll.
This
Has
is
anyone
what I'm creating, right? Like, this is what I'm
exactly?
doing. Yes, yes,
And
yes.
just thinking about, the importance of community for Black women, and how, certainly now there are avenues for doing that didn't exist then. And again, this entire show was curated, well, mostly during COVID.
COVID, right.
Those the preciousness of human connection has never been more evident. And the fact that we got all these slideshows online, that many of these women, maybe see each other once a year, but
Yeah.
mostly communicate online, is just, it gives me chills. I just think, outside of the importance of dolls and how each of these women come to be a collector for their own reasons and have their own story of collecting, that community that has been built up over the years of women who are united in their, this pastime, this love,
Yes,
is
yes, that's huge.
incredibly
And it's a
impactful.
huge
Yeah.
community too. You'd be
Yes.
surprised. It's a very huge community of people who love their dolls and love collecting dolls and love the history of dolls,
Yes.
because it's a history of us, really.
Yep.
It's a history of us. So I wanted to ask you too, like you were saying, doing this during the time of COVID, other things that you have curated that were not in a COVID society, and now you're creating things that are. Is there a big difference of how you go about, the curation of your programs, or has it been more challenging, or is it much more interesting to do it this way? Like, what has been the ups and downs of doing that during this COVID time
Well,
for
that's
you?
a fascinating question. In some ways, we've been able to really carry on our work, maybe not as usual, but it hasn't, thank God, put too many, absolute, halts to what we do. Obviously, the galleries have been closed for many months on and off as lockdowns have kind of come in and out. And that's very frustrating and different because, we are a museum, we're not a website.
Right.
We're founded upon the idea that it matters to go to a room and stand in front of an object. And when that hasn't been a safe thing to do, our work has felt a little unmoored from its intentions, But at the same time, I always say, especially when I first began curating for the New York Historical Society, and I had done a little bit of curation work before, I don't understand how people used to curate exhibits before the internet. I just, yes, sometimes you do have to pick up the phone and call places, but the ability to just log on and say, this is what, here is what artifacts exist at the Frederick Douglass, National Park site. Click through a gallery of them. You can see the years there. Everything is just there. So, it becomes, hi, excited to be in contact. We're interested in this item. Do you have it available to loan? Yes or no, rather than like, hi, person I've never met. What in the world do you have? Can you describe it to me over the phone? I don't know how,
How they did it way back in the day. That's what you're saying.
No, not at all. My
Saying,
curatorial ancestors, I take my hat off because that is incredibly difficult. But one of the things that I think I didn't know about the curatorial process before doing it, and I think a lot of people don't know, is that there's a really remarkable spirit of generosity amongst different cultural institutions. It's just such an admirable example of, it's good for all of us to be in community here, that you'll need an object I have, happy to lend it. You have I have an object you need, happy to lend it. We can't have everything on display always. All of us have, mountains of things in offsite storage. It's only so wonderful if someone says, hi, this thing that's not on display, can we use it for our exhibition? And then please do, take it travel to another venue, that's all fine. So the spirit of, yes, we're happy to lend, here's how we can be helpful. That's been such a beautiful process.
Good.
During COVID times, it's been a little tricky. There was a while when the Smithsonian museums weren't loaning anything at all. And so we had to work around that. So, as museums become short-staffed, obviously, it's tough to staff people during this crisis. And so there have been challenges in that way. And then, of course, usually, there is some level of getting to visit things face to face. We did, carefully were able to visit the collection a number of times to make some choices and to kind of start grouping things. But yeah, for the most part, it was entirely remote, and we just kind of had to mold ourselves around the circumstances. But as I mentioned, I think one of the upsides, I know over the course of the various lockdowns, it's been really helpful for me to be able to go to digital programs. If the Westchester Public Library was doing an event at 6 p.m. on a Wednesday, in 2018, of course I wouldn't be able to go. But now you can just close your work window, open up a Zoom window, and get to go to all these talks. And certainly there have been a number of, even for research or for, conceptual reasons, getting to see all these different talks and, be in conversation with people, have big meetings, has been possible. And I think is now forever going to be a part of the curatorial process. I can't see going about some of this without, being able to be on a Zoom with a scholar who has, some knowledge you need. So I think that part of it has been helpful. And of course, now that we're preparing programming, I'm so glad that we'll be able to share with people who aren't able to come to see the exhibition.
Yes.
I know a lot of we had a really robust communication with women from Oakland, California, and the doll collecting community out there. I don't know if any of them will be able to come to New York and see the show, but we can invite them to all the events, and they can, we're going to be able to, digitally send them a picture of themselves in the slideshow. So I'm just really grateful that I, will have more to offer people than just a thank you so much. I'll be able to share. So
to share it, yeah. More digitally. So that's true. And I think part of that COVID thing, yes, it's throws a wrench into everything, but I think it also opens up the opportunity to be able to share things further away than you normally would have. I mean, because you can invite people, but you have to think of the expense of flying in, doing all those things, where a lot of the times you can do a tour online, or you could do something where it's more accessible now to so many more people worldwide, Right. So I mean that it's a good thing, it's a bad thing, it's all these things you have to work around. So so that's good though, that you now found other things that that you're probably going to implement into the work that you do because of COVID now, whereas you probably wouldn't have done that as much. Right, or it would have been too much of a hassle, or those kinds of things. And it's funny too, and again, not to get too metaphysical with things, but another part of working on this exhibition, let's dive deep then. So good. Another part about working with these dolls, many of which are well over a century old, is they exist at all, that most dolls that were made in that time period are long gone. They were chewed by a dog. They were, burnt in a fire. They were these are, original sustainability. These are biodegradable, these aren't in a landfill somewhere. Those dolls in that time period are mostly gone, but these remain. There's a kind of testament to resiliency in just being able to look at these. And, there are more than 100 dolls from the Deborah Neff collection on view. There is a range of condition, right? There are some that are just, wow, I can't believe you can still see every stitch on every button, to other ones that are like, this doll has seen better days. But I think there is just something about, and we have at least one section where it's, more or less a wall of dolls. It's a volume display. We have some individual labels that say, oh, take a look at the beading here, or like this kind of skirt develops, in this time period for these reasons. But for the most part, that section is just take it in. There are, dozens of dolls, and just, consider them. And while there are many things to consider, how was it made, maybe who made it and who played with it, one of the things that I think you can't help considering when looking at a display of, 19th century dolls is just,
I can't believe these still exist. I can't believe they're here. That's not unique to dolls. You know, the same thing, you could say the same thing about documents.
Yes.
You know, that we have, you know, some document samplers in the exhibition that are from, you know, I believe that the 18th century. You know, it's not unique to dolls that they exist at all, but I do think when you're looking at these artifacts, from our best guesses, from what we know, largely made by Black women, and that they exist, there's just something really moving about resilience and, you know, the human capacity to make something that endures and to endure oneself. That, you know, we're talking about
So
COVID.
true.
I think it's been, you know, a little trippy to be working on an exhibition for, you know, over the time of, you know, incredible challenge and difficulty and precarity. And to also think about these dolls, which are
Yes.
precarious and fragile, but they
Yes.
made it, you know?
Exactly. Just what I was gonna say. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think there's something to be said, a kind of larger context of resiliency and, you know, survival through the odds that I think no matter what will kind of come through to anyone who's, you know, looking at these dolls in a I don't even know that we could say a post-COVID era, in a, you know, in an ongoing COVID era.
Yeah, that's true. It's so funny. You're so right. I think that the juxtaposition of that, right, of the you know, resiliency and, you know, the things that they were going through and the things that connected them, you know,
Yep.
to what, you know, just to you being able to showcase these dolls in this time. Like you said, really weirdly kind of just kind of metaphysical in a way, you know?
Yes, and wasn't
Yeah.
on our mind when we decided to do the show, or when the show first, you know, when we first started. But certainly,
Yeah.
that's where we've ended up.
Yeah. Well, that's
Definitely.
great. Well, I'm so excited about it. I'm just so
Oh, I'm so glad.
excited about the New York Historical Society putting this together, and I'm so excited that you got an opportunity to help to curate this beautiful exhibit that's coming. So, can you just let us everybody know again when it's going to be happening, where they could see it if they want to come to see it actually, you know, in person, and to share some information about that with us? That'd be great.
Sure, happy to. So we officially open to the wide public on February 25th. And the show will be up through June 5th. So into the summer months. So if anyone's got summer holidays planned for New York, please come visit us. And as I mentioned, they'll be announced soon, but we have a number of events that will be scheduled to investigate other themes of the show. So as I mentioned, some on particular dolls, on photography, on you know, women's handicrafts. So those will be forthcoming as well. And as I mentioned, those will be available virtually. We will be, after a lot of back and forth, we will be using just the hashtag one word Black dolls. And I know that's a hashtag that's used otherwise, and that's actually part of the reason why we chose to use it, is we know that there are going to be people using that word to, you know, show off their new doll they just bought, and also people who are visiting the gallery and, you know, dropping a photo of their experience there. And so that will be just part of a larger conversation about Black dolls. And so as the exhibition opens, you know, we invite people to either come to the show and share their experience, share a childhood photo. We're hoping people share some of their pictures of themselves with dolls, but also, you know, to click on that hashtag and explore that online world of doll making and collecting and memory. I think as much as we're excited for this exhibition to happen, I think it's just, you know, one piece of a larger story, of a larger community. And so if people come and view our show, we would love that. If people use this as a portal to get involved in other ways, that's terrific as well.
That's great. And what is the website they can go visit to find out more about it?
Oh, sure. You can go to nyhistory.org. To find more information about the show, and then on all social channels, so Twitter, Instagram, it's just at NYHistory, and you'll be able to learn a little bit more.
Great. Well, oh my gosh, Dominique, thank you so much. This has been it has been so exciting for me to just learn about the history of how this Black Dolls exhibition, how it came together, and also all the amazing dolls that you guys are showing. I think it's going to be so beautiful for people to see, and the community is going to love it. I just know they're going to love it.
Thank you so
It's going to be
much.
so great.
And if I could
Really
just
so
say
good.
one thing to kind
Yeah,
of,
sure.
I always love to
Please.
kind of do a little behind the scenes of, museums more generally and how they work.
Yes.
Obviously this show is mostly loaned items by a particular collector, Deborah Neff, who's displaying her collection. We have a few dolls from other institutions. The Bedford Whaling Museum is loaning us a doll, and a couple of other places. But one of the notes I do want to say is that over the course of curation, we were able to purchase dolls for the New York Historical Society to add to our collection for the show, but also forevermore. And it's something I think people don't realize. Again, we're a museum and library, that museums are, yes, a place to go to events and a place to see exhibitions, but we are also an archive. We also hold history. And, forevermore, these dolls, and most of them are 20th century commercial dolls. So we have a Sarah Lee doll, we have a Baby Nancy, we have Addie, we have there's one more. We have a Christie doll.
You have a big beautiful doll? You don't have a big beautiful doll.
Don't have a big beautiful doll yet.
Come on,
but
first time fashion doll, you gotta have a big beautiful doll.
We're hoping to travel this show, so maybe in the next venue that curates it, we'll have to add that in.
You have to ask me. That'd be great.
But I think, when we think about, again, we talked about representation, that representation is important on all channels, right? It's important in media, it's important in the dolls we get our children, but history is important to all of us. And, there are places where history is made and kept and furthered. And while that's all of our work, we all are the stewards of our own family histories, of our oral histories. Museums and libraries are not the only place that history happens, but they're crucial sites of inclusion and representation, and where stories get added to the canon. And I say that to say I'm incredibly proud that we were able to add these dolls to the New York Historical Society's collection alongside the Picassos and, the Course of Empire and all those things. And to really look at and to encourage people to look at their institutions and, write a letter to your museum or to your library and say, we would love to see this kind of thing when we get on display. That as cultural institutions, we get money from the National Endowment for the Humanities or from the NEA and all these things. That's, your taxes help pay for these wonderful shows, which is great, but that also means you get a voice. And I just love that there is a direct line to, the women who advocate for why the Sarah Lee doll is so important, or Shindana Toys was such a crucial part of the Black Power movement. That advocacy means that museums consider them important, add them to their collection. And now forevermore, if we do an exhibition about the 1960s, the Baby Nancy becomes something we can turn to every time. And that absolutely local people have a voice in what's on display at their local and national institutions. And we are open to hearing that voice. If enough people turn to us and say, where are these big, beautiful dolls? We're expecting to see them. That catches our eye and says, oh, maybe we need to have one. And so, there are people, there are museum curators who are, have incredible amounts of expertise and knowledge about what constitutes a strong collection, and that's an always open conversation.
Right.
But there's a place for everybody in those kinds of conversations, and I really encourage people to have a voice in the places they go to. That we hope you come, we hope you love it, we hope you walk away satisfied, and we hope you keep up the conversation. Write a letter, get on our case. It changes things
for people to know that there is a place for that. And
absolutely,
and that museums are not just something that's old, right?
Nope.
Or something that is like just there as a building and like you never visited. I mean, there's so much information and so much history and so much knowledge that people have curated and put there for people to embrace, and to be a part of. So I think that is so important. So thank you for sharing how important that really is. Yeah, really is. So I'm just excited to have you on. I'm so happy that you decided to visit in the doll world and share all the things that are so important, right, for history in general. Not just, like you said, not just about dolls, but just about history, everybody's culture and history, through what you're doing and curating all these amazing exhibits that you have coming out, that have already been there, and that are going to be, showing up as well. So thank you so much for that. I really do.
Oh, thank you so much. And yeah, forevermore now after this exhibition, and I'm in the doll community, whether I like it or not, it's forever going to be a part of me. So I mentioned that thing about, the Black Dolls hashtag being a thing. I'm going to be visiting it no matter what from here on out. I've enjoyed this world too much to let it go.
Oh, well, thank you. We welcome you into the world.
Wonderful.
And into the doll world. Thanks so much, Dominique. Thank you again for being in the doll world with us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And everybody, please make sure you go check out the New York Historical Society and see the amazing Black Dolls exhibition coming up and all the other amazing exhibits that they have and that they will be sharing in the future. So it's really important to do that. Really important to support them, I believe. So thank you guys for joining us, and we'll talk soon. Bye.
Bye.